Vault Veritas SCP Files Episode 96 Unnatural Selection. Incident Report 5405-2. Second known incident report involving SCP-5405, colloquially known as Bad Design. Object Class: Euclid. Risk Assessment Level: Low. Reported by Dr. Theodore Whitner, Junior Ecologist. Report made March 10th, 2022. Day 1. The storm has broken and a hot sun has suddenly leapt into the sky. Not 10 minutes ago, the rain was so intense I could scarcely see 5 meters in front of me, and I thought the wind itself might seize me and drag me up into the canopy. But now it is still, utterly still, and the forest carries on as it always does, ignoring and yet somehow still at one with the unpredictable violence around it. This is an odd place indeed. It is a 50 square kilometer stretch of northern Canada that appears, at first glance, to be much like any other section of forest. But upon stepping inside, one is transported somewhere else entirely. Another forest, similar and yet radically different. A non-Euclidean space of twisting roots and ancient warping trees that groan continuously beneath their own impossible anatomy, and it resembles nothing else that exists upon this earth. The species here are entirely unique and entirely unsuited to life anywhere at all. I have been instructed to log it all, to describe in as much detail as possible everything that I see. And yet I scarcely know where to begin, for the life here is alien in the truest sense of the word, and I can hardly determine how some of it survives at all. It seems to me one colossal, catastrophic structural failure, an ecosystem assembled incorrectly from the ground up, such that every species here ought to have been erased by natural selection almost immediately. And yet here they persist, living despite all known ecological science, dying and suffering right before my eyes, but persisting nonetheless. Shall I start with one of the trees? I have personally noted one such rather common variety of tree that I can tell you without additional research cannot possibly exist outside of this space. It appears, at first glance, to be a pine. But they grow wider as they grow taller, resulting in odd bulges and huge branches, balancing on tiny trunks that thin as they approach the ground. As they crumble beneath their own weight, their bark splits wide open, revealing wet and fibrous inner wood, orange and sticky with bleeding sap. Even when the splits are old and run all the way down to the base, they continue to ooze endlessly, as though the tree is incapable of properly sealing the wound. The inner pulp is veined and pulses faintly with the exertion of trying to support so much impossible weight. Entire trunks are bowed permanently sideways, some split nearly in half, collapsing into the dirt and mud beneath themselves, and yet still they cling stubbornly to the vestiges of life. Leaves still push from the bulbous limbs. Fruit still grows from the edges of the twigs. The trees continue trying to lengthen and grow despite their warped and collapsing structures, resulting in an endless chorus of cracking wood and tiny internal pops continuously sounding beneath the bark. There are insects living inside them. They have burrowed deep into the wood, carving winding tunnels throughout the trunks, and squeezing their pale bodies endlessly in and out in ceaseless crawling lines. They have hollowed out so much of the interior that when I peeled back a strip of bark, I found not wood beneath, but thousands upon thousands of tiny openings vanishing deep into the trunk, all shifting and writhing with movement. The insects swarmed over my gloves immediately, desperate and frantic, as though fleeing a sinking ship. I wonder now how much of the shifting trees is growth and how much is movement from within. If the insects left, I suspect the entire forest might simply fold in on itself. Between the constant cracking, the wet tearing, the skittering movement beneath the bark, and the thunderous collapse of distant trunks, the forest does not sound alive. It sounds diseased. I do not like these trees. I suspect they shall follow me into my dreams. When the insects swarmed across my gloves, I could not stop thinking about how easily they might burrow into material other than wood. Skin, muscle, perhaps even my eyes. I shall be moving my camp farther from the tree line tonight. There is a clearing just a mile from here. Day 3. The clearing is better than the tree line by far, and yet I do not think I can bear to remain here much longer. The starvers rest here, you see. I dislike the name I have given them. It feels cruel. But after observing them for several hours, I cannot bring myself to call them anything else. They are roughly the size of small foxes, and similarly present as predators at first glance. They possess long, retractable claws, sharp teeth, and forward-curving ears, and I have observed them repeatedly attempting to stalk and pursue the smaller, rabbit-like fauna that graze throughout the clearing. But whatever process shaped life within this place seems to have abandoned them halfway through. Their legs are too long and too fragile to properly support their weight, bending awkwardly beneath their bodies with every uncertain step they take. Their eyes are positioned poorly upon the skull, not forward-facing, but wide upon the sides and unevenly placed, one sitting slightly higher than the other, so that when they attempt to track movement, they do so with a strange, jerking uncertainty, as though they are never entirely certain where the world around them actually is. And so, when they hunt, they fall. Constantly. They stalk forward with agonizing care, only for their limbs to buckle suddenly beneath them, sending them crashing muzzle first into the dirt with sounds I first mistook for snapping branches before realizing that it was bone. The other creatures do not fear them. Often their prey does not even bother to flee. A rabbit-like grazer might simply hop a meter or two to the side before returning immediately to feeding, while the starver writhes in the grass, attempting to right itself. Even when they reach their prey, they snap at empty air or grasp at the space beside the animal entirely, unable to judge distance correctly enough to understand where their target actually is. Once, only once, I witnessed one successfully catch something, a small bird-like creature. The starver seized it in its jaws, and for a moment it froze there, trembling violently with what I can only describe as anticipation. And then I watched it fail to bite down. The muscles in its jaw were too weak to properly puncture flesh. The mouth hung unevenly from the skull, shuddering with exertion, and eventually the starver simply forced the animal deeper into its throat instead, swallowing it whole in frantic desperation, while the joints of the jaw audibly cracked and dislocated around the struggling body. Even when starvation leaves them too weak to stand, even when their legs are twisted or shattered or their fur hangs wet with blood, they continue attempting to hunt. I observed one dragging itself through the clearing for nearly 40 minutes using only its front paws, while the useless remains of its hind legs trailed limply behind it. It still lowered its body when prey approached, attempting to stalk. It still lunged weakly at passing movement, despite no longer possessing the strength to properly lift its own limbs. There is something deeply upsetting about watching instinct continue long after the body has ceased being capable of fulfilling it. Eventually, the creature collapsed entirely. I believed it dead until several minutes later, when I noticed its claws still flexing weakly in the grass each time another animal passed nearby. Day 5. I cannot escape the torment, no matter how far I travel. Today, having finally had my fill of the starvers and the endless sounds of cracking wood from the tree line, I turned eastward and followed the river instead, hoping perhaps that the water might offer some reprieve from the constant spectacle of things failing to survive correctly. Overhead, I heard a flapping, and believing it to be a bird, I turned and watched the newest oddity I have the displeasure of documenting. At first, I mistook it for some growth upon the trees themselves, an odd pale orb high within the canopy, until it emitted a strained wheezing sound and slowly unfurled itself like a malformed sail catching the wind. As more drifted overhead, I began to understand what it was I was witnessing. A species composed almost entirely of thin, boneless membranes which balloon outward when caught by strong enough currents, lifting the creatures helplessly up into the sky where they drift wherever the weather decides to carry them. From a distance, it is almost majestic to witness. They drift silently above the forest canopy in great pale clusters, rising and falling gently with the currents like kites carried upon the wind. Until the weather changes. The storms here arrive suddenly and without warning. One moment the air is still, and the next the forest is bending beneath hurricane-force winds. I watched several of the creatures immediately be tossed, vanishing violently into the tree line, their bodies wrapping around branches with sickening impacts that echoed through the canopy in gooey thuds. They make almost no sound after impact, only a thin, wheezing cry that rises and falls with the wind while they hang there, tangled and often impaled, high above the ground, their skin fluttering weakly for days afterward, while blue blood slowly drips down the bark beneath them. I will not look up again. But looking down offers little comfort either, for I have entered the territory of what I have reluctantly begun referring to as the overgrown. They are octopedal creatures over 9 meters in length, which wander ceaselessly through the forest floor until eventually they stop moving entirely and drive the sharpened tips of their legs deep into the soil beneath them. The earth appears to fuse around the limbs almost immediately. The dirt blackens and dries around them, while the creatures emit a low vibrating hum as they feed, absorbing nutrients directly from the soil. The longer they remain still, the deeper the fusion spreads across their limbs. The soil hardens onto their flesh in root-like structures, packing them in tightly until they seem to become one with the earth. But eventually, they must move again. And when they do, there comes a tremendous tearing sound as fused flesh rips free from the ground in long, wet strands, while brittle sections of bone snap apart beneath the strain. The creatures emit a deeply agonized humming cry, stumbling forward on freshly exposed bone, while strips of meat remain behind, clinging to the solidified dirt. They heal abnormally quickly, though not correctly. Their snapped bones re-heal as they are now shaped, joints calcifying in strange positions. Their limbs bend in new directions after every pause in migration, until no two specimens resemble one another anymore. If their limbs reform in too abnormal a position, they cease to be able to move at all, and there they remain, in one spot, until they are so fused into the earth they can never move again. To starve, or to mutilate oneself simply to feed. To drift endlessly until the weather decides where your broken body shall fall. To collapse beneath your own weight while insects hollow out what remains. Every living thing in this forest appears trapped within some impossible compromise between survival and suffering. I no longer believe this place is merely hostile to life. I believe life here itself is wrong. There is no possible way evolution was involved here. These creatures were created, and by something that either barely grasps the basics of biology or actively enjoys witnessing suffering. I am ready to leave and make my report. Day 7. I have camped upon the edge of the exit, and tomorrow I shall finally leave this place behind. I have encountered the last creatures I intend to document here, and I dearly wish I had never seen them at all. I have come to suspect that something within this forest has been observing me. These creatures were not present when I first entered this region. I am certain of that. And yet, when I returned several days later to begin my departure, I found them waiting near the tree line, as though they had been assembled there specifically for me to discover. I call them the Crooked. And before anyone witnesses my sketches and calls them humanoid, I will tell you up front that these are not people. But I suppose we can say they resemble failed attempts at them. Imagine a human body constructed without cartilage. Their skeletons possess no cushioning whatsoever, resulting in every movement forcing bone directly against bone with audible, grinding pressure. Each movement damages them. Every step produces tiny fractures and splintering cracks throughout the skeleton, followed almost immediately by rapid, imperfect healing that splints the injuries back together incorrectly. No two individuals share the same posture anymore. Spines twist sideways. Limbs fuse at unusable angles. Several drag partially immobilized legs behind themselves, while others walk permanently bent double beneath the weight of malformed vertebrae. They are a pitiable lot. Several have fingers fused together into blunt, paddle-like appendages that paw clumsily at objects they can no longer properly grasp. Others have fractured their hips so many times that the joints have healed, rotated almost 90 degrees from their original positions, forcing them to stare sideways at the world while they move. They are social, gentle even. They help each other stand, leaning the more severely disfigured against themselves, despite the awful, grinding shrieks it produces in their own bodies. I watched one collapse while attempting to cross a shallow incline. It could not rise again afterward. The others gathered around it immediately and attempted to pull it upright. But when a loud snapping crack rang out above the chorus of agonized wailing, they recoiled almost instantly and abandoned the effort. They simply could not afford the damage required to help it. I thought perhaps I could communicate with them. I even approached one and attempted to speak with it. It was attempting to straighten its spine against a tree, snapping its bones in sharp shrieks as it tried to pop the joints back into place. It stopped at my approach and tilted its head. I spoke a few soft words, and it watched me. Then, moving slowly and stiffly, it drew a symbol into the dirt. A crude circular shape surrounded by radiating lines. A sun, perhaps, or an eye watching. It pointed first at the symbol, and then slowly at itself. And then it resumed forcing its spine against the tree. As I prepare to leave this place, I find myself unable to stop thinking about that drawing in the dirt. Whether it represented a deity of some kind, or merely some instinctive attempt to explain the suffering around them, I cannot say. I am going to formally recommend immediate extermination procedures for all known life forms within SCP-5405, alongside widespread incineration of the affected ecosystem and permanent containment of the surrounding area. I no longer believe the organisms within this forest are capable of meaningful survival. I believe they are simply enduring, and I believe allowing that endurance to continue indefinitely would constitute cruelty beyond measure. I dearly hope my advice is heeded. The database confirms that Dr. Theodore Whitner's advice was not heeded. The forest remains untouched and contained by a simple metal fence extending around the affected area. The request for neutralization was denied for the simple reason that there were found to be no significant or immediate threats to humanity. No further exploration is to take place. Anything exiting is to be immediately incinerated. Outside of that, life inside will continue as it always has, existing and suffering under the Foundation's largely indifferent watch.
Vault Veritas SCP Files is a podcast inspired by the SCP Foundation. Unnatural selection is based on SCP-5405 by researcher Calloway from the SCP Wiki located at scpwiki.com/SCP-5405. It is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 3.0 unported license. This episode featured Justin Gellner as Scott Anderson. It was written and edited by Leola Angel. We welcome comments. Please rate and review us, email us at vaultveritas@gmail.com, or join our Discord channel using the link in the episode description. Thanks for listening.